Have you ever walked away from a woman feeling like something was missing, but you couldn't quite name it? Not your money, not your time, but something deeper, your power. Like somehow in the space between your grin and her silence, she measured you, weighed you, and walked off with something you didn't even know you gave. And it lingers. You ask yourself, how did she get stronger without saying a word? Why is it that every time you tried to impress her, tried to be charming, funny, impressive, it felt like you were shrinking instead? This isn't about games or manipulation. This is something older, something more primal. This is the tragedy that most men never see coming. That women aren't outplayed with clever lines or slick words. They're outplayed with presence. And nature figured this out long before any of us were born. You see, we've been raised in a culture that teaches men to perform, to speak louder, to dress sharper, to earn more, to say the right thing at the right time. But nobody ever told us this. The most magnetic, most terrifying energy a man can carry is stillness. Not stillness as in doing nothing, stillness as in power, the kind of calm that doesn't react, the kind of silence that feels like a king sitting on a throne while the world screams in front of him and he doesn't flinch. Nature doesn't cater, not to people, not to emotions, not even to those who desperately crave to be seen or heard. Nature, like the true man, doesn't explain itself. And that's the catch, because explanation, it's often just apology in disguise. And any man who feels the need to apologize for simply existing will always be ruled by those who don't. Most men think that control begins with confidence in speech, that dominance comes through charisma. But Nietzsche flipped that whole idea upside down. He said true power doesn't come from what you say, it comes from when you no longer need to say anything at all. He once wrote, "The voice of beauty speaks softly. It creeps only into the most awakened souls." Let that sit for a moment. If beauty speaks in whispers, why are you shouting? If power moves quietly, why are you still begging to be heard? You think women fall for what you say, but here's the brutal truth. She's not listening to your words. She's watching your tolerance. How quickly you fold, how fast you chase, how easily you surrender control just to be liked. And none of that takes words. It's all in your actions, or your lack of control over them. Here's what nature understood about women that most men still can't accept. Women are not fragile. Women are not weak. They are intuitive, strategic, and experts of the unspoken. Where men try to dominate through rules, strength, and structure, women navigate with energy, absence, and impression. And that's why most men lose, because they bring a hammer to the ocean, thinking they can build something solid. But when she goes silent, everything they built gets washed away. You want to outsmart a woman? Then you have to outgrow the boy inside you, the one that needs to be liked, the one that panics when she pulls away, the one that can't sit in silence, that texts when he's ignored, that argues when he feels disrespected. That boy is prey. The man, the real man, the Nietzschean man, he doesn't explain, he doesn't argue, he doesn't chase, he withdraws. Not to punish, but because he has standards. And that withdrawal, that calm, grounded, wordless pause, it messes with her more than any speech ever could. Because in that moment, she can't decode you, and women fear what they can't read. This is where the game shifts, not with a punchline, not with a comeback, but with a refusal to play. When you stop responding to her emotional traps, her silence, her tests, her bait, something changes. Not in you, in her. Because a man who doesn't need to explain himself becomes something else entirely. A mirror. One that she can't manipulate. Most women are used to men folding. Folding at the first hint of rejection. Folding when things go quiet. Folding when they're tested. And every time a man chases, begs, argues, he confirms what she already suspects, that she holds all the power. But the man who sees through it all, who stands still, calm, unmoved while the storm rages, he becomes a mystery. And mystery, my friend, is magnetic. Nietzsche said, "He who fights with monsters should look to it that he himself does not become a monster." And that includes emotional monsters. That includes the fights we pick for attention, the arguments we start just to feel control, the explanations we give just to be validated. Every time you react, you're showing your hand. Every time you try to fix things with words, you're handing over your power. And the man who does that is no longer leading. He's chasing. But the Ubermensch, nature's ideal man, he's different. He's not moved by emotion. He's not guided by the need to be liked. He's not a man who begs to be understood, because needing to be understood is just another form of weakness. You want her to see your value? Stop needing her to. She doesn't need your backstory. She doesn't need your pain spelled out. She doesn't need a tour through your trauma to know your worth. She needs to feel one thing, that you are completely okay whether she understands you or not. That is sovereignty, not cruelty, not distance for the sake of ego, but that terrifying stillness of a man who doesn't need approval to stand tall. That's the man who can walk away mid-conversation. That's the man who can sit through silence without fidgeting, who doesn't explode when tested, who doesn't break when ignored. Not because he's playing hard to get, but because he doesn't need to be gotten. And that right there, that's not manipulation. That's liberation. It's what separates the men she forgets from the ones who haunt her. You want to outsmart a woman? So let's get this clear. The power is never in chasing. It's in not chasing. It's not in reacting. It's in refusing to react. That's where the balance shifts. Because most men are painfully predictable. They crave closure, affection, validation. They crave her apology, her attention, her admiration. But here's what that craving really is. Slavery in disguise. A man who craves is a man who can be controlled. And as long as your peace depends on her text back, her tone, her mood, you're not free. You're just a puppet waiting for permission to breathe. Silence, real silence, is where the detachment starts. And detachment, that's the highest level of discipline a man can reach. Picture it, the strength it takes to watch her leave and say nothing. To hear her insult you and not flinch. To be tested, pushed, provoked, and remain unmoved. That's not weakness. That's not coldness. That's the kind of presence most men never develop. It's not the absence of emotion. It's the presence of self-control. Because silence, when it comes from strength, is not empty. It's full of meaning, full of power. It forces her to sit with herself, with her own doubts, her own fears, her own games. You become the void, and in that void, she sees her reflection. That's unsettling, because she's used to being the mirror. She's used to men reacting, dancing, explaining, pleading, accepting herself. Nietzsche didn't write for the soft, compliant man. He wrote for the dangerous one, the man who doesn't panic when left alone, the man who doesn't rush to explain his every move, the man who doesn't need to smooth things over just to be liked. And that includes how he deals with women. You don't outsmart a woman with clever pickup lines or slick manipulation. You outsmart her by becoming the one man she can't figure out, the one man she can't move emotionally, the one who doesn't orbit her moods. And why does that disturb her? Because silence breaks her control. Every time you spoke just to avoid conflict, every time you explained yourself to calm her storm, every time you bent your dignity to keep things smooth, you trained her. You taught her that your identity is tied to her approval, that your power can be bent, that your boundaries are flexible. And once she knows that, it's not if she'll test you, it's only how far. But silence, real, deliberate, unshakable silence, teaches her something new. It teaches her that you're not afraid to walk, that you're not moved by drama, that your peace is not up for negotiation. That changes the game. Because now, for the first time, she meets a man who doesn't chase her. He chooses her. And there's a world of difference between the two. One is desperation, the other is power. You want to outsmart her? Let her burn herself out trying to break your stillness. Let her spiral. Let her accuse. Let her test. Let her throw the emotional grenade she's used to watching men trip over. But you say nothing. Not because you're playing games, but because you're done playing hers. You don't reward chaos with explanation. You don't feed disrespect with attention. You don't validate the drama by responding to it. You let it collapse under its own weight. And when the silence becomes too loud for her to bear, when she finally speaks, you still don't explain. You speak once, with clarity, with finality, with a decision. And then you walk. Because that, according to nature, is the true will to power, not controlling others, not winning the argument, but mastering yourself to such a degree that no one else can. Understand something here. Women aren't your enemy, but they're not harmless either. They are the great testers of your soul, and most men, God help them, fail that test by becoming boys, emotional, reactive, needy. They swing between wanting to be loved and being terrified of being alone. But the man who passes that test, he sees through the game. He doesn't play emotionally, he plays with clarity. He sees the patterns. He doesn't flinch, and he does something rare. He stops playing by her rules. Nietzsche said, "The individual has always had to struggle to keep from being overwhelmed by the tribe." And that tribe, it's not just society, it's not just your job, your social circle, or your family. It's your relationships. It's the emotional pull that expects you to conform, to submit, to shrink. The modern man is told to always be soft, always be expressive, always explain everything, even when his soul is in pieces. But real masculine strength, it's quiet. Not because it's hiding anything, but because it knows words are traps. The more you speak, the more you reveal. The more you react, the more you give away your control. So what does this mean for you? It means everything you were taught, you need to unlearn. Every instinct to explain, to fix, to prove yourself, you have to kill it. You must become the mountain. Still, calm, immovable. A presence so grounded it makes others question themselves. A silence so solid it commands attention without needing to raise a voice. And here's the beautiful irony. When you reach that level, the very attention you once chased start chasing you. At first, she'll resist it. She'll push harder. She'll call you arrogant, emotionally unavailable, cold. But don't be fooled. Those aren't insults. Those are confessions. Confessions that her tactics are failing, that your silence has become the mirror she can't crack. And sooner or later, she starts talking, but not to provoke, to understand. Because the man who needs nothing becomes the man she needs most. That's not manipulation. That's nature. When you're unshakable, unpredictable, and undemanding, something ancient wakes up in her. It's not just attraction. It's not just curiosity. It's instinct. She senses she's in the presence of a man who doesn't need her to be whole, who doesn't reach for her out of emptiness, who chooses her out of... And that choice, that sovereign, grounded, complete choice, it's irresistible because it's rare and because it's real. This is the level nature designed you for. Not to be needy, not to be reactive, not to beg for validation, but to stand as a force. The Übermensch isn't an abstract idea. He's the man who doesn't bend for affection, who doesn't chase comfort, who doesn't fear loss because he's already claimed his value. He's the man who doesn't seek power over others because he's already mastered the hardest thing of all, himself. And when that man speaks, it's not to prove, it's to declare. When he walks away, it's not in anger, it's in authority. But here's the bitter truth most men can't swallow. Most will never get there. They'll keep reacting, chasing, explaining. They'll keep believing the lie that if they're good enough, patient enough, or understanding enough, they'll finally be chosen. But Nietzsche knew better. He saw through it. He knew that being good is often just fear wearing a smile. That patience, when it's driven by fear of loss, is just a longer chain. And that kindness, when it comes from insecurity, isn't virtue. It's self-betrayal. The Übermensch doesn't love to earn anything. He loves because it is his nature to give. And when that nature is met with disrespect or manipulation, he walks. Not with resentment, not to punish, but because his love is too sacred to be mishandled. He owes nothing, and that's why he owns everything. You see, the loudest men in the room, they're not powerful. They're afraid. Afraid they'll disappear if no one's looking. Afraid that without attention, they'll vanish into irrelevance. That without being seen, they're nothing. But the man who can sit in silence, unbothered, unfazed, disconnected from performance, that is the man every woman notices. Not because he tried to be noticed, but because he didn't. Now we've reached the edge of everything, the final threshold, because silence on its own is not enough if you still use it to be seen. If it's still a tactic, it will fail. If it's performance, she'll sense it. If it's rooted in anxiety or fear, she'll feel it. True silence isn't an act, it's the result. The result of transformation. Can you walk through life without needing to prove you're right? Can you love a woman without needing her to love you back? Can you lose her without losing yourself? That's the final ascent. And it's a climb no one can map for you, because it isn't taught, it's lived. This is the silent revolution, the rebirth of a man who no longer moves from fear, from lust, from guilt, or from loneliness. It's the death of the version of you that begged for attention, that needed approval just to feel alive. When you burn that part of yourself, when you kill the hunger to be chosen, you rise from the ashes as something else. You don't chase women, you don't chase closure, you don't chase applause, you simply are. And when a woman stands before that kind of man, she doesn't see a tactic. She doesn't see a player. She sees a riddle, one that doesn't need solving, one that doesn't need her permission to exist. And that lingers, that haunts her in silence, even in your absence. Because this is the silence that outsmarts her, not because it's manipulative, but because it's pure. It doesn't bend, it doesn't explain, it simply reflects. This is the silence of a man with nothing to prove, nothing to hide, nothing to chase, nothing to fear. The silence of a man who could argue, but doesn't, who could beg, but would rather bleed, who could react, but instead chooses to observe. And it's right here in this space, this sacred, unshakable stillness, that your greatest power is born. Not in how you talk, but in how you don't move. In how you hold the line while everyone else breaks. In how you let her come and go and never lose your center. In how you refuse to be baited, explained, or drawn into emotional performance. You no longer need to be the loudest voice, the smartest man, the most agreeable guy. You just need to be the one who stays standing. Because the man who can remain silent while others beg to be heard, that's the man who leaves the deepest impression. Not because he tried, but because he didn't. So from now on, treat your silence as sacred. Let it be the sanctuary where your dignity lives. Let it be the boundary that protects your self-worth. And when someone tries to drag you into chaos, watch. Don't react. Don't explain. Don't defend. Smile and vanish. Not to punish them, but to remind yourself you are no longer the man who explains himself to be loved. You are the man who walks away to be free. And if this message hit you somewhere deep, if it reached something raw and wordless inside you, don't let it stop here. Like, share, subscribe, because we're building a generation of men who no longer bow, who no longer beg, and who never again apologize for existing. If you're one of them, I'll see you in the next video, because the weak chase noise, the strong master silence, and the wise, they choose exactly when to break it.